You're listening to the Nerd to Know Media Network. Join us at nerdtoknowmedia.com.
Broadcasting from the Blanchistan Center, this is Phoenix FM.
The internet is a communications tool used the world over where people can come together to bitch about movies and share facts.
According to the Nerd Index, you should be upside down in a junior high toilet around the clock.
This is We'll do it live! Time goes in, time goes out. Never miscommunication.
It's over 9,000! My name is Foxy.
The balls are in there. Do a barrel roll! Don't save me, bro! It's a trap! I'm a firing memory. Time to do. Hey, Charlie, wake up! Oh, God, oh, man.
Hello everybody, welcome to Nerd to Know Basis. My name is Darragh O'Connor. This is Phoenix 92.5 FM, nerdtoknowmedia.com, and welcome to the show. This week we have a change to our regularly scheduled programming, and we're going to bring you two of the best shows, or two of my personal picks from the Nerd to Know Media archives. So instead of having our normal show when we don't get to record one or whatever, we're going to bring you stuff from our back catalogue of shows. We have hours of shows. I think there's something like over 300 shows or something like that we have over at nerdtoknowmedia.com. So, and they're all free. So if this is your first time checking this out, please go over to nerdtoknowmedia.com, where you'll be able to get all these shows for absolutely zero. No money, it's all there. There's also on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, all that kind of good stuff there as well. So please do enjoy the show. And again, if this is your first time checking us out, please do spread the word of the show, Nerd to Know Basis, here on Phoenix 92.5 FM, and of course, nerdtoknowmedia.com.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Game Corner. My name is Kieran O'Callaghan, as always, and we have a very special guest this week from Australia. This is Michael Hilliard, who is a journalist and podcaster who hosts the very popular LAN Podcast. How are you doing, Michael?
I'm good. It's great to be here.
Excellent. Thank you so much for making the time for this. Are you having a good day?
It's been good. We're just buried in a bunch of stories and watching the world, burn around. So it's great to be, showing you with the one time of my week where I get to actually relax and play a bit of games to get away from this crazy planet.
Well, I'm sorry to be a contrarian, but before we get into the fun, relaxing game stuff, I'd love if you could chat a bit more about your podcast work. So tell us about the LAN Podcast. What is it that you do?
So the LAN, what we do is we do a big geopolitical deep dive every fortnight. So we get big experts in from, the White House, the CIA, MI6, Downing Street, Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge, who come in and give their expert opinions on one big subject shaping the news. So whether it's, the Russian hypersonic missile program or, the Libyan civil war, they come in and give their opinions on what's happening, how we got here, and where the war's heading. So, really interesting stuff to be focusing on big stories that we kind of miss in the news. A lot of these big stories, you have 60 seconds on CNN to pitch it, but, we take it a full, hour and a half and really dole out how, a small conflict like, let's say, Yemen is actually absolutely instrumental to the entire region.
Well, I mean, that's a very good point because, we won't get too kind of into the weeds on this, but we are, especially amidst the lockdown, we are kind of living in an age where it's very hard not just to find information, but find things to focus on and really kind of dive into because everything moves so fast.
Oh, yeah, there's just so many stories every day. I mean, my phone, I wake up, because I have friends who are journalists all around the world, and we all, chat about, I have friends who focus on certain areas, and I'll wake up with 4 messages, one, crisis in this country, crisis in that country, and it's really hard to focus, even for someone who has, this is what I do, all the time. I don't know how the average person can keep any sort of idea on all the crazy things going on.
That's exactly it. And you said off the air that you started this podcast 6 or 7 months ago. What was kind of the spark that made you want to do it?
So it was very weird. I've been ghostwriting it a bit for quite a while now, but I've been traveling and reporting from these, places like, Uzbekistan and Iran and Russia and all these places. And I had this weird black book of contacts that were, guys from the Taliban and guys from Russian intelligence and guys from British intelligence and, this weird network of people. And a friend of mine who runs a couple of radio stations over here was like, look, let's do a show because, it'd be pretty crazy to get, the Taliban's opinion on something. And I'm like, it sounds like a weird thing to do, and kicked it off thinking it would be kind of a side project. Who cares? It's just going to something I do in my spare time, and end up gobbling up most of my time. And now, it consumes my every waking moment.
Yes, well, I don't do anything on the kind of global level of that, and I still understand how like kind of projects like this can just sort of, because the second you start doing this, everything in your life sort of starts circumventing into the podcasting. Do you find like?
All the time, you end up just, it just like you wake up in the middle of the night and go, oh, that's why that country's doing that. Okay, and then you like writing it down, and my poor girlfriend will be woken up by me being like, oh no, you got to understand, Serbia will do this if that happens. And she go, yes, honey, it's lovely. You're winning, son, and put me back to bed.
Well, I can't speak for journalism, but I can speak for. I have done quite a lot of kind of playwriting in the past, and I do know that all the best ideas arrive at roughly between 3 and 4 in the morning.
Yep. My entire office is, it looks like, one of these crazy people's rooms where there's just maps and string everywhere. And it's like, it's all connected. This general knows this person and he's had a photo with this person. My whole life has now just become maps, string, and small amounts of
If you haven't seen it, I must send you the It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia thing of Charlie's like kind of meme of all the things on the wall with a cigarette shaking in his hand and all that kind of stuff. Like,
that is me. I am the biggest fan of Always Sunny to begin with. And I Pepe Silva I'd love to slot any Pepe Silva references I ever could into anything. Charlie's energy there is just me at every Thursday afternoon.
Well then, to kind of pivot out of the sort of panic attack stuff, like we've had a lot of different guests from all over the world kind of talking about their experience of the lockdown and kind of how gaming has helped them kind of cope with that. How have things been? I'm assuming you've been in Australia throughout the past 2 or 3 months kind of dealing with this, have you?
Yeah, I flew back in. It was weird. I was in Hong Kong when it first kicked off. When they were reading the stories of, hey, this thing is, there's some weird disease coming out of China. It was like, oh, that's weird. And then kind of came home, and then I went to Malaysia as it all kicked off again. I came home. Australia's been pretty good for it. It's not really. We haven't seen the numbers that a lot of places have. But it's been very odd because obviously a lot of my friends are journalists who are living in, Kyrgyzstan and Iran, and America and the US. And, gaming's been really good to kind of just, we'll sit there and play Call of Duty or something and just be playing and, comparing our lockdowns to each other. It's been a really kind of leveling experience for everyone.
And like, you say you've been talking to journalists all over the world, like kind of, has there been a unifying type of experience, like, or is it like different strokes to different folks depending on where everyone is, like?
Oh, it's hugely. I think the biggest wake up call for me, I was on this US panel show doing a COVID piece, and they had this guest on before me, and they asked him, how's COVID going for you? And he was saying, well, me and my wife, we bought up a bunch of guns, and we take shifts to make sure we sleep with one person awake. And, if anyone comes through the door, I'm going to shoot them because that's what I'm going to do because I want to defend myself. And they went to me, he's like, Michael, you're in Australia, how's COVID going? I went, well, I bought 6 bottles of vodka. I'm down to 4, and that's about it. So it's incredibly different compared to countries. Over here, the whole thing was quite mild because we locked down very early. So it really is different strokes for different folks on this one.
I know exactly what you mean because, like, when I'm not doing this, I work in a bookshop, and like we, fortunately, Ireland and Dublin in particular, closed up relatively early, kind of late February, early March. But you just heard reports of people still kind of going about their day to day from like places like the UK and that kind of stuff. And like, we didn't even do a massive stock up here. There was a bit of a run on toilet paper, but apart from that, it was just kind of staying indoors, and that was it. Like, I'm glad to see that kind of where you've been based is kind of more or less the same. Like,
yeah, it was toilet paper just disappeared at the start, and then there was a lot of weird things. Like our Prime Minister came out and said that puzzles are now an essential service. It was very weird.
You know, actually, I will back up your Prime Minister on that, because the first thing we ran out of in the bookshop was jigsaws.
Yeah, I don't doubt. I mean, I went and bought a jigsaw myself, and yeah, no, it was weird, the things that you really needed. It was like toilet paper and odd things that I never thought would be, I traveled to war zones where that's, that is a scarcity, but never thought I'd see it in my cozy little place in Australia.
All right, well then let's pivot from there into the game. So what game have you been playing the most since the lockdown started then?
I mean, I'm a terrible basic person, but the game I'm playing most is Call of Duty, Modern Warfare and Warzone. I've been playing quite a lot of that because my friends are all playing it. I'm not a huge first-person shooter guy, but, I've affectionately been called the bullet sponge. And at this point, I spend most of my time acting as they call bait. Hey, Michael, head in there and see if there's any enemies so we can clean them up later.
It's a tough job, but someone has to do it.
Well, yeah, I think the last time I played Warzone, we got towards the end, and my orders from the friend of mine who's very good at the game was, hey, can you get in the car and honk the horn as many times as you can and cause the most ruckus and lure these guys out so we can then snipe them off? And that's about as useful as I am at these kind of things.
Okay, so can I just double check, because there have been quite a lot of Call of Duty games. When you say Call of Duty Modern Warfare, are we talking like one of the most up-to-date ones, or like a PlayStation 2? Like...
No, I used to play that one quite a lot. That was I actually ended up going to Chernobyl just to, because I played that old one so much. But yeah, no, the brand new one, the one with all the, and it got so different. I think the last Call of Duty I played was Black Ops 1 before this. And then all of a sudden I come in and there's attachments on your guns and you can name your guns thing. And there's people, doing thumbs up to me as they kill me. It got so much more complicated.
Yeah, I remember, I think, and this is to show how far back I am on Call of Duty, I lost patience with it back in Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare 2 when fragging was a thing. You killed someone and they automatically dropped your grenade and they essentially got a free kill for no good reason.
Yep, it's I remember it being called martyrdom, if memory serves.
That was it, yeah.
And everyone used to use it. That and the grenade launchers that everyone would just like attach to the guns and at the start of the round, and you just end up killing 4 or 5 people. But the weirdest thing, one of my best friends is like, he's currently unemployed at the moment. So he's been playing for sort of 8 hours a day and he is just phenomenally good. Like, could probably go pro with this thing. So whenever I play by myself, I feel really good about myself because I'm matched with people about my skill. And I'm like, yeah, no, I'm pretty good. I'm doing well. And then he'll invite me into his server. And I just go back from being where I feel comfortable with myself to being, like a duck kicked between people at this point.
I know exactly what you mean, because a few weeks ago we had a lovely chap, Neil, on, who introduced me to this Star Trek Online game. And I started playing it on my own in the single player, and I felt like kind of top of my game. And then I started playing with them, who've played for literally 10 years. And they've got like the most advanced ships, and I've got this piddly little escape pod thing trailing behind them. So I know it's very humbling to play with incredible experts, like, kind of when you kind of are only casual, like.
Well, that's it. My television is also, like, I bought my television for $50 3 years ago. So while these guys are playing on, like these full, beautiful little gaming rigs, I'm playing on my TV with like squinting like an old man sitting 2 inches from my television, waiting for like, is that a person or is that a car? I can't really tell at this point.
I imagine just firing like wildly into the air.
I do. I named all my guns Spray and Pray for a good reason.
And tell me something. Why did you go back to this game now then? Was it just because your friends were playing for the social aspect, or was it something else?
I think there was 2 things that brought me to it. It was one, that all my friends were playing, and the second one, they did this amazing little feature in the new Call of Duty that when you kill someone, it turns their mic on for about 5 seconds. Which I love, because there's nothing better than shooting someone and hearing this like 10-year-old kid scream down the line like, "One more!" Nothing is more humbling than that. I can have a terrible day at work, but knowing that I've ruined a 6-year-old's day and I'm bullying children is the most power I'm going to have that day.
I had the reverse experience because I tried the game Fortnite because I do drama teaching, and a lot of like kind of kids on there. And I would play it and I'd go, "Ah, no!" And you just hear all these children's laughter. Like, because you're such a new player compared to these experts with llamas and things like.
It just boggled in the mind. The other one, a bunch of like my Russian friends all play this shooter kind of. It's kind of like Fortnite, but what if Fortnite? What if the maker of Fortnite had depression for 40 years? Is Escape from Tarkov? It's the best way I could ever sum it up.
Now, before you get into this, I actually haven't heard of Escape from Tarkov before you mentioned it. So, what platform is it on? Where can people find it?
It's weird. It's like only played by like Russians, and it's only on this like independent indie game platform. You can't find it on Steam, and it's only played by like angry Russian teenagers who will all immediately swear at you in Russian. But everyone is brutal, and there's like, it's like a survival zombie game, except all the other players are Russians and they all have Russian mindsets, and they will take it out on you. If you are the English speaking person in the lobby, you will be hunted.
So you mentioned that you are essentially like a kind of bullet soap for like Call of Duty. Is it your same experience with Escape from Tarkov then?
Oh, it's far worse, because at least some Call of Duty players take pity on me. The Russians, because that's the thing, my Russian's all right. I can speak some good Russian, but after a few drinks, my Russian goes from a nice Moscow accent to a disgusting. He goes from like, to like, my awful Australian accent comes out, and it just reverberates. Those sort of old movies where you hear like the person crack the twig and it just reverberates through the whole jungle.
Yeah.
As soon as my awful Australian accent reverberates through the mics and the servers, you just feel every Russian just dive in and find me.
I must say,
terrifying.
I don't mean to be like a red flag to a bull, but I've never heard Russian spoken in an Australian accent. That's a thing of beauty.
It's awful. It really is. Australian accent's awful. It's a butchering of the English language as is, but butchering Russian is just a hat on a hat at this point.
And what made you seek out this game and indeed stick with it then?
That's the thing. I had a bunch of Russian journalists who were all like, we have this game and you should play it and you'll love it. It's not that hard, they said. And I was like, I trust them. And then I got online, and I think they just brought me in as a punching bag. It became, that classic English game, where they send the foxes out and they go hunt them. I am the fox in that game.
Well, at least you're the center of attention in that scenario, I suppose.
I had PTSD from it, but sure, yeah.
And tell me something then, like, because as I've mentioned many times, we've had kind of people on who play games like apocalyptic games and that kind of stuff because they find the extreme levels of it relaxing compared to the lockdown kind of scenario. What is it that draws you into these shooter games? Do you find them relaxing or adrenaline kicking? Like, what's your kind of feel for them?
I think it's actually the opposite for me. It's the least thinking you have to do all day. I spend my entire time thinking, about, Filipino politics, and then to come and just shoot at an 8-year-old who's screaming down the server is kind of oddly relaxing. Particularly as I'm not very good at the game, but there's just something satisfying about it. But I used to be a real nut for real-time strategy games, and particularly the old like Age of Empires and medieval Total War kind of games. So this is me kind of getting out and doing first-person shooters for the first time, and definitely feeling the learning curve there.
I know what you mean, though, because I used to play a lot of Age of Empires, Empire at War, that kind of stuff. But when you play shooters, you almost don't have time to think. You just have to kind of go with whatever it throws at you, like.
Oh, it's more reaction time more than anything. The game I used to play ages ago, it's the most obscure game. I've never found anyone else who plays it. I think there's like 20 downloads in the world. It was this game called Empire's Dawn of the Modern World, and it was like this Age of Empires ripoff. It was the same creators, but you go from medieval up to World War II, and I think me and my brother have collectively clocked probably 3,000 hours on it. But I don't think anywhere else in the world knows it. So if any of your listeners know Empire Dawn of the Modern World, please hit me up. I will be your best friend.
They will now, because we'll put that big flashy image on top of your episode. Like,
good. I hope so. It's an obscure game from 2003 that I've collectively clocked about 3,000 hours on over the years.
I know exactly what you mean, though, because I was a big PC player back in the 90s and 2000s, and a lot of the games I've gone looking for simply don't exist anymore because they come from a sort of CD-ROM pre-online era of gaming, like.
Yeah, it used to come in 2 CD-ROMs because it was that old. And it took about, I remember playing it on Windows XP, if that kind of gives you any hint on how old it is. It was just this weirdly addictive little game that, like, I would hate to know how much of the like exact strategies my brother and me have learnt about it over the years, and it's just such useless knowledge. I forget friends' birthdays all the time, but boy oh boy do I know the best strategy to use France in World War One.
I know. I think my big ones were Tactics, which is a weird one no one remembers, about a pterodactyl that has to lift sheep with a magnet, and Chaos. Yeah, can't find it anywhere. And Chaos Gate, which is a Warhammer game, which so far as I know still hasn't made it to Steam. But it's so out of date, you can't even play it if you have the CD-ROM. And I think it's actually pre-XP at this point. Like,
ooh, wow.
But like you were saying, I still remember how the strategies and how to beat the first 3 levels glued to the back of my head. But like critical moments from like my own daughter's like kind of first year, nothing. If it's not on Facebook, it's gone.
There's a lot of glasses of vodka between now and then. So. There's so many little games like Rambo. No, not Rambo. Turok, the dinosaur hunter game. I used to play that.
I remember that.
All the time. I think I played the free demo where you get like 2 levels for free, like a gazillion times when my parents bought it for Christmas one year.
But that was it as well. If you were like a kid in the 90s playing games, you would get a demo and you'd be happy with it forever. I think I had the first level of pod racing and just kept doing that endlessly and didn't get bored. Like,
I played so much pod racing, but I played a Malaysia burn of it. So it was like bits and pieces would just disappear all the time. It was just like awful. Like there was one map that they just, I think, built in terribly. You just fall off the map randomly. That and Pokemon. I played so much Pokemon as a kid.
Oh, was it like, are we talking like a normal version of Pokemon or like a Malaysian version of Pokemon?
No, the normal version. I actually played, I was the guy who took it way too seriously as a primary school kid, to the point where people would like, where do you catch a Jigglypuff? Well, Michael will know that. And I would be like, well, I can tell you that for 3 Chupa Chups, I can tell you where you're going to get that Jigglypuff, eh?
It's funny that you mentioned that. Because, we had, in our school, our school backed onto like a park with a big field. And like when Pokemon was the big thing, you would have people who are experts at the card game, people who are experts at the game, and people who are experts at collecting the thing. And people just became such big Pokemon experts so quickly, like.
Oh, it was, my Pokemon Silver, I think I clocked about 1,500 hours on that thing. Like I just spent so much time on it. That's the thing. It's now dead because there's the old Silver cartridges. They all had a battery in them that all dies eventually, which is kind of annoying. But I remember just like booting up and then seeing so many bad names. I think like how young I was. I think my rival's name was Butthead or something. And I used to giggle
pretty
every time.
Accurate for that rival, though. To be fair.
It is indeed, but it was always, I used to giggle every time, like, Butthead challenged you to a fight. I'm like, oh, got him, boys, got him.
Oh, yeah. It's, you know what? Actually, I used to give all the Pokemon nicknames, and it scared me off getting a tattoo because I'd give a Pokemon a really creative nickname. 3 days later, I'd hate it.
Yeah.
Like naming them all after the Beatles or something like that, you know?
And then you just get super attached to certain Pokemon for absolutely no reason.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a friend of mine, Saoirse, was on the show last week. Like she went, I think, straight from like the Game Boy Advance ones up to like whatever the Switch ones are now, Sword and Shield, and having all these new Pokemon, like, and trying to keep her old ones at the same time was just too much emotions at once. Like,
well, that's the thing. I don't know anything past, I think, Gen 2. So for me, it's like, I'm pretty sure I can probably name the whole first 150 Pokemon, like in sequential numeric order from 1 to 150. Couldn't tell you anything past about Gen 2 though. Like I have just no knowledge. That is uncharted water, new territory to me past Gen 2.
I'm exactly the same. We had the Pokemon Red, Blue, Yellow, Gold, and Silver, and then went no further. Like it's, I have a friend of mine, Lisa, runs an up-to-date Pokemon show and talks about all these elaborate Pokemon 495, and it means nothing to me. Even on the Switch, I just got what is effectively a remake of Pokemon Yellow. Like, I'm full-on very retro. But I gotta ask, since you seemed like you put a lot of hours into it, did you ever finish a Pokedex?
I did. I finished my Pokedex. I even went and forced my poor parents to drive hours away to go to some event where they gave you a Celebi. I made my poor parents years ago drive like 3 hours away to take me to some event where they would give you a Celebi just so I could finish the Pokedex. I was that kind of guy. I mean, I still have, to show my love for Pokemon at the time as a kid, I still have very little feeling in the bottom of my feet because I barefoot walked to the local video rental place in a 42-degree day to go get Pokemon Stadium 2. Yeah, like Pokemon was my entire life for about 5 years there.
Wow, and because I remember reading about the Celebi thing in Pokemon magazine. Like, the only way I got a Mew was like getting one of those like things that hacks the Game Boy cartridge, which I still have somewhere. But like, yeah, and like you'd never get that nowadays. Nowadays, Celebi with like a digital download or something like that. They made you work really hard for games back in the 90s and 2000s. Like,
oh yeah, I had to go all the way down to this shopping mall and stand in queue for a bit, and then answer some questions, and then you hand your cartridge over to a guy in a very tight shirt, standing next to a guy in a very hot Pikachu suit who's probably sweating to death in the Australian heat. And he would hand you back like, "Here you go, kid," and then you'd have a Celebi. It's like, saying it out loud now makes absolutely no sense.
Enjoy your legendary Pokemon vegetable.
Off you go, off you. You got your bean sprout now. Go play the games.
All right, we've got 2 or 3 minutes left on the clock. So I believe there was one more game you really wanted to talk about.
I mean, the other game I play quite often with friends and probably am a terrible person for it is Super Smash Brothers.
Excellent.
And, I used to play the N64 all the time, and then I upgraded to the Wii, and my strategy did not change. I am, that really annoying friend you have who plays Kirby, who just goes up and up and up and up and then smashes back down as a stone. That was me. That is my only strategy. I stand by it, and I am the king of the beatdown until I meet a player who plays Pikachu, who does the beatdown as well, and zaps me as I get him up.
Pikachu has a lot of really fast tackle moves, doesn't he or she?
That's the Pikachu's got fast moves, but they've also got this like, you can be down and it does this lightning bolt that comes from above. So if I'm a Kirby floating above him, he'll wait, do it, and the lightning bolt will hit me before I hit him. So whoever played Pikachu would always just spend his time targeting me, and I'd spend the rest of my time just floating around like a pink ball of death.
I've got to say, the last time I played Super Smash Bros. Was actually at a college event with like 4 or 5 people, and there was just so many flashing lights and stimulus that I couldn't even tell what I was doing until I saw the little player one thing just flash off into the distance somewhere miles away. Is that still your experience of it?
Sometimes, but a lot of bars actually do it here. So a lot of like when I was touring in band and stuff, a lot of the punk venues in Australia will have like a Nintendo or a Wii or something set up in the venue. So quite often you're like sitting at the back of a crowded, dingy, dive bar, and you're playing Super Smash Brothers against just randoms you meet in the bar. So it's a bit more prevalent here than a lot of places.
I can only imagine like alcohol plus Wii motion controls creating some wonderful nights and some horrible accidents at the same time.
Oh, of course. I think the best one I ever saw was I was playing Mario Kart with some guy, and he pulled his cart over to the side of the road, went and got a drink, came back, and then was like indicating to come back onto the road. So I kind of had a look around. I was like, man, that is some very safe driving for Mario Kart.
All right. Well then, Michael, we are nearly out of time. So is there anything you would like to say on the air before we wrap?
No, it's been an absolute pleasure to be here, and thanks so much for having me.
No worries. And you're welcome back on the show anytime you like. Would you mind just plugging your own show just one more time before we stop?
So if you want to hear some, very different geopolitics, so very deep dives with Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge, the White House, and the CIA talking about what's going on in the world, big crash courses on everything you'll need to know about, Venezuela or Nagorno-Karabakh or the Philippines, you can check us out on the Red Line. We're on Apple, Spotify, all the usual podcast places and online and YouTube as well. So the Red Line Podcast, and you can listen to me act smart for about an hour and a half.
Excellent. All right, then we'll call time on that episode. Thank you so much, Michael Hilliard. And this has been the Game Corner. We'll be back the same time next Friday. Thank you for joining us. Goodbye. Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of the Game Corner. I am Ciarán Calcón, as always, and we have a very special guest with us today. Someone who I'm actually just meeting for the first time. This is Lukas Eggen from the LAN Parties Podcast based in Las Vegas. Lukas, how are you doing?
I am doing well. I'm honored to be on the show. Thank you for inviting me.
No worries, and thank you very much for reaching out, because you have been kind of in the podcasting game yourself a fair while, haven't you?
I have. LAN Parties started in January, but before that, I had been a part of a few other podcasts of the year, so something I'm used to and something I love doing.
That's fantastic. And so for our kind of generally Irish-based listeners who may not have checked out your podcast, kind of how did you get it started and what's the hook?
Yeah, so LAN Parties is a video game and esports podcast, and we try and talk to guests who are involved either on the content creation side or the actual making of games. So we've had some voice actors on as well. So that's kind of our hook to kind of get into their stories. And we started because I'd actually pitched this idea to my boss. I work for the Las Vegas Review-Journal, which is a news organization out here. And I didn't hear anything back for a couple months. And then one day my boss came by, introduced me to my co-host Ryan, and said, I think you guys would do well together, and why don't you get started on that podcast? And we were off and running after that.
That's mad, but isn't that just the funniest thing? You meet, certainly we wouldn't have met without the kind of podcasting sphere being a thing. So I'd say it's a great way to meet new people for you, right?
Oh, definitely. It's a great way to get to know people, and I just love meeting all these people that, like you said, never would have met before, and just to hear their stories. It's fascinating and a lot of fun.
Excellent. And I've got to say, the kind of gamer in me has to ask, you said you've had voice actors on the show. Who have you kind of chatted to so far?
So our biggest name is Nolan North. We had on a couple weeks ago. And just in case, if anyone's not familiar, he was the voice of Nathan Drake from the Uncharted series, among others.
Yeah, I imagine it's hard to become known as a voice actor since there's no face, but certainly Nolan North is one of the big ones, right?
He is, yeah. He's he always jokes that he's been in a ton of video games, that he tried to take over video games. That's he'll joke around with. But yeah, no, super nice guy, super very genuine and down to earth. So it was a lot of fun to talk to him.
That's brilliant, and I must say, because I've never kind of had a celebrity on the par of Nolan North. No disrespect to my previous guests, but the odd time I've met someone from Star Trek or something like that at a convention, I have that immediate don't say the wrong thingness to it. Was that your experience having him on?
It was. I had to prepare myself for about half an hour just to stop myself from nerding out on him. He was. I did a little bit. I couldn't stop it completely, but I definitely. I had to prepare a bunch of questions so I didn't lock up. I was ready to try and combat just fanboying out too much.
All right. Well, just for anyone who might be listening to this for the first time, the reason the Game Corner got started was essentially as a way of checking in with people during the lockdown in Dublin and kind of find out what board games and video games they've been playing. We have been grateful enough to actually receive a lot of American interest in the past few weeks, including yourself, Lukas. So how has big question, how has the lockdown been for you so far? Has it affected you at all, or has it just kind of breezed by you?
All things considered, I've been doing pretty well. I've been lucky enough to be able to work from home. So my hours haven't changed, just the location. I will say it's been a little weird just because working for a news organization, I'm used to a lot of that person-to-person interaction. So to have to do a lot of that over emails or online has been different, to say the least. But I've been keeping healthy, just keeping my time outside to a minimum to basically go grocery shopping and whatnot. So all things considered, it's been pretty well. I've been lucky enough to stay in contact with friends and family, and they're all doing pretty well. So been pretty good.
That's fantastic. I'm glad to hear that now, because certainly so far we've been grateful enough to have someone on from California and someone on from New Jersey. And like the experiences they've told us have been totally polarizing, you know. So I'm glad that like some semblance of normality has kind of been maintained for you, at least, even if it's more online, so to speak.
Yeah, and you know, that has played a big part in being able to handle this well. You know, I've been working from home for a little while now. I think since March, I want to say, is when they started having me work from home. I swear the days kind of string together for me. But it's you know, I've kind of gotten into that groove. I've set up my office in a different room than my bedroom to kind of get into work mode, so to speak. So it's been kind of those small adjustments and just kind of getting used to the new daily routines.
Excellent. Well then, I suppose with that long introduction, and thank you very much for indulging me, let's move on to the games. So what kind of games have you been playing to kind of keep yourself occupied throughout this whole strange season?
You know, I'll tell you what, the game that I tried for the very first time was I started playing Dungeons and Dragons online over basically over Discord, and that's been a heck of an experience. It's like I said, it's a game that I was always interested in trying, but never had that right group to really kind of delve into it. And because so many of us have so much more time, it seemed like the perfect time to give it a try. And I must say, the group I'm with has been amazing. I ask a ton of questions, so bless their hearts, they have to deal with me asking a lot because I'm a total newbie to it. But it's fascinating, and it's a fantastic way to stay connected.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. So far in our previous episodes, we've had Ray Carney, who was like one of those like top tier Dungeons and Dragons player who was like managing 4 different campaigns. We've had Mavon, who was just in it for creating her world. And then we had an opera singer on who was just in it to be a dwarf smashing rats and stuff. So kind of what's been your Dungeons and Dragons experience? Are you kind of coordinating things, or are you following the group? What's been your experience so far?
So just following the group, and you know, initially I was actually a little nervous because I didn't know everybody in the group, and pretty much everybody else had played before. So I was a little nervous that I'd be slowing the group down too much, but I must say it's been a lot of fun. I'm learning a ton. Hopefully I'm starting to get things down just a little bit. I really enjoyed the crafting of my character, kind of backstories and all that kind of stuff. Like I had a lot of fun coming up with backstories and being able to kind of express yourself in a way that you don't get to on a normal basis.
And well, then that's a good segue right there. What kind of character did you end up crafting for yourself?
So I'm a half orc, and I consulted with a friend of mine, and he kind of helped me arrive at that, and kind of helped me arrive at what class to do and what weapons and everything. So I came in with a character that was kind of tailor-made to be easier for me to kind of slip into and get going with this first campaign.
Yeah, because I suppose you don't want to, because I've known people who've been like, you know, things that can summon owls and like all these complicated things, like, so I suppose you wouldn't want to kind of reinvent the wheel on your first go around. Like,
yeah, he's basically my character plays just like I do in most video games, which isn't exactly smart, but it's attack first and then ask questions after.
Well, that kind of lends itself to being an orc, doesn't it?
It does. It really does. So I feel like it's a good fit.
Yes, I must say I've only ever played D&D twice. My experience of the orcs is that I played in a small group of 3 with 2 players and 1 kind of dungeon master. And I was like a half-elf kind of druid. So essentially I was the D&D equivalent of like a huckster used car salesman, like really smarmy type. And I was paired with a half-orc woman. So we ended up being this weird, like, kind of midnight run double act where, like, I could, like, talk our way into things and I had to stop her from punching people. So have you kind of found your place in your group yet as your character?
I have. I guess I was really lucky because my girlfriend came into the group with me, so she's been kind of helping ease my nerves and whatnot. And so we kind of play off each other a little bit. Her character is much more reserved and thinks things through. So it's a little bit of a good mix there. I'm the muscle, I guess, for lack of a better word, and she gets to stop me from doing too much stupid stuff.
Which, I mean, you got to let your character kind of take you where you go, like, and if you're an orc, you got to go with your impulses, like.
Exactly. I mean, sometimes you just have that urge to want to attack somebody, and hey, you just got to do it sometimes. Sometimes they deserve it.
I really hope that clip isn't taken out of context 10 years from now. Moving swiftly along, you mentioned that you've started introducing your girlfriend to video games off the air. Has that been because of the lockdown, or was it kind of for another reason?
It's partly because of the lockdown. She had gamed when she was younger, but our experiences were just different growing up. So I was very much a console gamer, and there were a lot of games that I love and adore that she hadn't tried. So we had talked about trying to do that, and with the lockdown, it kind of presented that opportunity where we could actually start and dive into that, and actually had the time to really sit down and enjoy the games and talk about them. And I swear she's a trooper, because the first game I've started her with is The Last of Us.
Yeah, that is sort of the deep end of the gaming sphere, isn't it?
It is, and in hindsight, thinking with the lockdown, maybe I should have went with a more lighthearted game.
Yeah, because the reason I wanted to bring this up is my fiance, I also recently got her into gaming via Nintendo Switch, but I started with like Luigi's Mansion. Like, Last of Us is quite heavy by comparison.
It's funny because I kept telling her about The Last of Us, and that is one of my favorite games of all time. And, I always tell people that was the first game that really hit me that video games could tell a story that was every bit as thrilling and emotional as any movie or any book that I had read. And so she was curious because I had talked up this game for so long. And with the sequel, at the time when we started it was about to come out. So I was like, this is the perfect time. And for better or worse, I was like, let's do it. And yeah, it's an emotional roller coaster. That's for sure.
Well then, tell you what, let's back up a bit, because on this show we do have some younger listeners who may not have played it. So in a nutshell, what kind of is the premise of the first Last of Us game?
Yeah, so the world has kind of gone to heck because of a zombie outbreak, an infection of sorts, and your main character has to... The short of it is your main character has to transport a young girl to meet a certain group, and that's all I'll say because there's a lot of twists and turns in there.
Okay, so... like, it's a zombie survival game, but not in the traditional, like I say, Resident Evil, that kind of thing. It's a very story-driven, kind of complex narrative.
It is, yeah. It's a very grounded game, and it certainly tells an emotional story. So it is very story-focused.
And why? Because certainly it's a big emotional commitment. What has drawn you to not only come back to playing it, but to introducing it to someone else?
I think because of the pacing that you really get to know these characters and you really start to form a connection. They're very human characters, which I realize is kind of strange to say, but you know how some stories, the main characters seem almost superhuman in a sense, and these characters are definitely not. And there's dangers, and there's relationships formed, and there's trouble, and so you kind of latch onto them. And I don't know, this story just hit me hard the first time I played it. It stuck with me. It's a game that when I talk to new gamers or non-gamers, that is always one of the first games I bring up. And to revisit it, I was kind of curious to see how the story held up. I had just played it the first playthrough, and I hadn't kind of come back really since. So I was kind of curious to see how it held up on a second playthrough.
I apologize, by the way. I'm not sure if you can hear my baby daughter shouting in the next room. If you can hear it, I'm leaving it in, and I don't apologize for it. So, you bring up a good point about the kind of investment in the characters, but surely with the announcement of The Last of Us 2, and it is out now in the world, it must be a little bittersweet because you want to see them again, but if you're seeing them again, it's nothing nice is going to happen to them, you know?
You're right. You're exactly right. You know, I was actually torn on The Last of Us 2. For the longest time, I didn't want to see sequel. There are some of those stories where you just kind of want them to leave their story as it happened. Yeah. And for the longest time, I was there. That's what I thought, and I didn't want to see them touch these characters. You know, sequels tend to, unfairly or not, I have this image that sequels tend to ruin the legacy of whatever you love most.
Yeah, well, funnily enough, on our main Nerd to Know Media podcast, our kind of team captain, Dara, somehow pivots every single conversation into Star Wars. And one of the things that we've kind of argued about quite a lot is that people complain that like the sequels kind of ruin Luke Skywalker or whatever's happy ending. I won't go into it too much here, but there's part of my brain that goes, well, the story has to continue, so conflict has to happen, so kind of what do you expect, you know?
Right. Yeah. So I will say I'll stay out of the Star Wars argument there.
Please, thank you.
but you know, I did kind of get to that point where I accepted this game is getting made, whether you wanted to or not. So I just kind of tried to pivot toward being excited to spend more time with those characters. I just tried to view it as a positive, and it was unexpected. And you know what? Maybe they'll do a great job, and if they do, that's fantastic. And so I tried to pivot to be more positive on the sequel, and I think I arrived there where I was super, super pumped for the sequel by the time it got released.
Yeah, and like, because this is something, I suppose the elephant in the room talking about The Last of Us is that it's come out during like a literal pandemic. I hope it doesn't get us demonetized or whatever. But like, a few episodes ago, we had an animator named Keith Byrne who said that he loves playing zombie apocalyptic games now because it's incredibly relaxing, because it makes real life seem nicer by comparison. Make of that what you will. But my question is, do you find it disconcerting to play a game like The Last of Us in the times we're living in now?
I do, and it's because of the type of game that it is. You know, if The Last of Us were something like a Left 4 Dead, I'm sure I'd be relaxed, because Left 4 Dead is just all action all the time, and zombies are just kind of the enemy. Yeah. But since The Last of Us tried to take such a grounded, realistic approach to it, it is a little disconcerting, because you start to think, oh, hey, we don't have to imagine how the world would react to a pandemic. We're seeing that. So it's a little weird, and I can't play for super long stretches of time. I have to have my counter programming in there. I have to have other games that I turn to kind of lighten the mood for sure. Yeah.
And like, that is a valid point as well, because like, gaming is such a big spectrum. Like, some games you play to relax, some games you play for like the emotional reasons, with The Last of Us. But overall, like, what, apart from these two examples, what kind of games have you found yourself drawn to? The sort of lighter ones or the heavier ones, like?
So mostly lighter ones. I am a huge Pokemon fan.
Yes.
So some of my earliest gaming memories is playing Pokemon on the Game Boy Color. So in my personal gaming history, that was the first gaming franchise that I just got obsessed with. And so for nostalgia's sake, I've turned back to Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu to kind of get my old school yellow version fix. And I do find that super relaxing, and it's just as fun as I remember it.
Well, that's just it. Like, certainly on our channel, we also have Straight Outta Kanto, who is an exclusively Pokemon news podcast. And like, she's been waiting ages and ages and ages for them to do a sort of Pikachu Let's Go version of Pokemon Gold. What games kind of Pokemon wise did you grow up with?
Yeah, so Pokemon Silver was like my peak. That was that was like the height of it. And just to give you an idea, not only did I play the games, I was watching the anime, I was seeing the movies, I was collecting the cards. Like I was their dream customer. Let's just put it that way. But Pokemon Gold and Silver was probably my peak, so that would be an awesome remake to see them do.
Yeah, they did do a sort of remake on the DS, but certainly it would be nice with all the kind of features of the Switch to really kind of go back to it again, you know?
It would, yeah, and the Switch being as popular as it is would be fun to kind of reintroduce those games to an entire generation of gamers that have not touched those older versions.
Exactly, and like I would be in the exact same boat as you, because I was like 7, 8 maybe when Pokemon came out, so I was all on it. I had and still have most of the cards. I got all the teddies. I played Gold and Silver and then kind of left it behind and came back to it when the Switch came out. So yeah, I think there is, I mean, as far as I'm aware, it's the only Pokemon game where you get a phone and you can ring up trainers that you've kind of faced off against before and see how they're doing and get an upgrade. Because like that's such a nice feature, and like daytime to nighttime, Gold was like really ahead of its time. Gold and Silver, I should say, like.
It was, and it's funny because people will make fun of the Pokemon series a little bit for making really slow changes across the games. But if you think back, you're right, Gold and Silver were really forward thinking, and there were a lot of features there that really were ahead of their time. Pokemon doesn't get enough credit sometimes. I know some features they move at a very, very snail's pace there, but in a lot of areas, they really do find ways to innovate and sneak some new features in.
Yeah, exactly. And like going back to the Gold and Silver, like it was a complete shock when I played it as a kid that you got to a certain point in the game and suddenly you were effectively playing Red and Blue again. Like you got twice the amount of game for no extra price or like hassle. If they released it now, that will be locked behind DLC or something like that. Do you know what I mean?
It would, which, by the way, don't get any ideas, Nintendo. Don't do that. Don't do that.
Yes, I know. I've had a few people reach out to me complaining that, like, I think Sword and Shield, you can only, like, trade or battle people if you're on that Nintendo Switch network, which kind of defeats the purpose of Pokemon, you know?
You're right. But, thinking back to that, you did get a lot of hours of gameplay on that. And it's a bigger deal when you're a kid, right? When you don't get to buy a ton of games, or you have to kind of pick and choose what games you get. And so any game that like doubles what you get to do is amazing. And it is like a miracle.
You're right. I would have been the exact same. Like, it was just like, you got a game at your birthday, you got a game at Christmas, and maybe some unspecified special occasion in between. And you just had to make do for the rest of the year. So if you got a game that was only like 2 hours long, you were just kind of stuck unless you literally traded your cartridge with someone else in school, you know?
Exactly. Or worse yet, you try and convince yourself that a bad game is good just because you're stuck with it and you're trying to tell yourself that you're enjoying it.
Don't say that now. My two go-to games on the PC were Rogue Squadron, which is good, and the Phantom Menace game, which is probably bad, but I milked it for all that it was worth. Like, so, that you're right, that relationship is skewed. Maybe if I had like the Steam range that I have now, it would have been different, but nostalgically, that's kind of glued to my brain,
Yeah, there are those games that I'd never want to revisit because I'm pretty sure they're actually bad, but I have fond memories of them. So I'm like, I'm just going to leave them as memories, and we'll keep the good thoughts in my head.
You're right, actually. I'm a big Doctor Who fan, and one of the Doctor Who's, Peter Capaldi, like they asked him, do you ever go back and watch those Doctor Who's from when you were a kid? And he goes, no, my memory's correct, the episodes are wrong, or something like that. Do you know what I mean? Because he prefers to have it just the way it is, with better special effects in his imagination. And I think there is kind of a place for that, it just to be in the time it was in, like.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's funny because that's always the danger of all these remakes and remasters, right? I know it's cool to see a lot of these classic games come back, but a lot of those games are classic because of of the time period they were released in or because of the circumstances they were released in. And sometimes what made them special back then makes them just another game today, so you kind of lose some of that luster. So you're right. Sometimes it's good to just kind of leave games where they are, remember them fondly, and be able to take those positive memories with you.
Excellent. Well, on that very sentimental, I must say, we are nearly out of time. So, Lucas, is there anything you want to say or plug on the air before we wrap?
Well, I would probably be yelled at if I didn't plug LAN Parties. If you guys are gamers, we'd be honored if you gave us a listen. We try and ask some interesting questions. You can find us on Twitter at LAN Parties Pod or myself at Lukas Eggen, and that's probably the easiest way.
Lovely. And just to kind of clarify that, can they find the LAN Parties on Spotify, or where's the best place to look you up?
Yeah, so we're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all those good stuff.
Excellent. Okay, well, Lucas, thank you so much for appearing on the show. I hope you had fun.
I had a blast. Thank you again. This was such a blast to be on it.
Excellent. And I think we'll definitely have to do a little bit more cross-collaborating in the future, because you're great fun to chat to.
You got it. I'm all for that.
Excellent. Well, then we will call that time on this episode of The Game Corner. Thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, we'll be back this Friday with new guests, new games, and a good time as always. Thank you so much. I've been Kieran Californ. This has been Lukas Eggen from LAN Parties Podcast, and we will see you next time. Goodbye.
Alright, so you're listening to the podcast, you're like, hey, I'm not in Ireland, how do I get in touch? Well, TuneIn has you covered. That's how you can check us out live when we're on the radio. You go to TuneIn and download the app, or you can check out the live streams on nerdtoknowmedia.com or Phoenix 92.5 FM. If you want to get in contact with us, it's very easy. Nerd to Know Media everywhere. Nerd to Know Media on Twitter, Nerd to Know Media Instagram, Nerd to Know Media on Twitch, Nerd to Know Media at gmail.com if you want to reach out via email. Hope to hear from you soon.
Thank you for listening to a Nerd to Know Media production.